Welcome to the Mrs. R Relevant Daily Draft Podcast, joined with the normal Wednesday crew, Owen, Durst, Bill, special guest Corey. If you are here to see Heather messaged right before the podcast and said she couldn't make it. So you're stuck with the five of us. I know that Heather has a prettier face than the rest of us, but we
Speak
are
for
going
yourself.
Yeah, I'm about to say, bro, I'm a good-looking guy.
All
right.
I might be digging my own hole. Yeah. But before we cover Texas and Ohio State, Bill, it's been about 7 days since I've seen you, even though I feel like we message every day. What is the good word in the Cleveland Browns arena today?
You know, the good word is the roster cut downs have happened. We are now ever closer to the start of the NFL season. Week 1 is going to be kicking off, and we are ready. We're down to 3 quarterbacks on the main roster, but we signed another one of the practice squad. So at this point, who knows? But things are good in Cleveland. There's a lot of optimism with some of the pickups we've had today. You know, Malachi Corley from Western Kentucky, Cole Strange from New England. So things are good in Cleveland, about as good as you can ask from a team that won 3 games last season.
Cool. And Owen, how is Curtis Samuel still a Bill?
That cap hit. I mean, the only way you're getting out of that is with the trade. So I'm not. So, I mean, listen. When he plays, he makes some good plays, and when he plays and he's healthy. I also heard. I don't know, Jim. You also take part in listening to some other Bills content as mine, and he's only missed 4 games over the past 3 years. He's just always banged up and not fully healthy. So it's like, okay, he played, but is he really there? So. I'm more surprised Elijah Moore made it. Shout out, speaking of the Cleveland Browns players, I'm surprised Elijah Moore made the roster over Curtis Samuel.
Y'all up to speed with Hard Knocks, by the way?
I just watched I missed it on Tuesday night. I just watched it after practice today, right before I got on here.
It's cool to see a good quarterback on Hard Knocks. It's like, oh wow, this is what it looks like to have a good team.
I actually watched my first Hard Knocks episode today. So
I didn't start from the beginning.
Any of it.
Yeah.
What'd you think?
Oh, I actually thought the hour I watched for this episode was pretty good, and my girlfriend was sitting next to me, and I'm like, "Yeah, he got cut. He got cut. He got cut." that was the commentary. Durst, you ready for some college football?
Oh yeah, been dog days of summer are basically over, and time for fall.
Yeah. So, Corey, welcome to Draft Professors. Are you ready for some football?
Oh, yeah, this is the best time of the year, especially down here in Austin. There's no professional team. So, we just wait around. Well, actually, let me not disrespect Austin FC, MLS, that's the one professional team out here. But come on, football. So, excited for the season for sure, especially with the number 1 ranking, first time ever in UT history.
Corey, if you could pick one Big 4 sport to be in Austin, which sport are you picking?
Oh, football. What?
You even with the Cowboys right around the same area?
Yeah, I just think that either way, it's enough for everybody in Texas. We can all eat. That's the way I see it. 'Cause it's all about family, faith, football in Texas. That's all we care about. So.
I also think that any Dallas fan would gladly give up the Cowboys if it meant giving up Jerry Jones. Let's be real here.
That's definitely true. That's definitely true. But the doc, he's trying to raise his publicity, his PR. Great PR move. Dropping the doc right now. Perfect timing.
100%.
Yep.
Yeah, I've made it almost. I think I've made it through. How many episodes is there total? I made it through most of them. Yeah.
It's actually pretty good, to be honest.
Yeah.
Well, we're here to talk about Ohio State and Texas.
Yep.
And I guess being the facilitator of this, I guess I'll start with a question here for Owen. Owen, when the Ohio State defense is on the field, who's the better player, Caleb Downs or Arch Manning?
So for me, just to go off of grade wise, I have Caleb Downs graded higher purely off the tape. And I think that's going to be probably my favorite matchup is, I guess, Caleb Downs is the player to spotlight for that Ohio State defense being the best player they have out there. But seeing how developed Arch Manning is when it comes to processing, getting through that Ohio State defense and being able to be able to distinguish between the different looks and how Caleb Downs can kind of manipulate his positioning and where he can line up, and then still impact the defense and impact the game for where he is. So I'm glad we started out with that matchup specifically, because I do think when they're on the field together, I would probably go Caleb Downs, but it's just because I get to see Arch Manning go against a top-tier defense with full, as the unquestioned number one starter, and see if he can mentally stand up to a defense that's going to have this much talent and is this cohesive with their best players still be coming back for the season.
Durst, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, if both players are going to be in the 2026 NFL draft, I would have to think I'm taking Manning. But for this game one, I think you're taking Downs. I think he's the best player right now. But it is kind of hard to compare like a devalued position like safety versus the most valuable position in all of sports and the quarterback. So, but I think for this particular game, this early in Manning's career versus a very seasoned veteran and Caleb Downs, I would have to say Downs.
Oh yeah, and I think it's a very abstract question because I definitely picked a very highly rated player at a devalued position compared to a Manning. So, Bill, how about you? Where are you in the Caleb Downs Arch Manning?
So, Durst and Owen have kind of hit the nail on the head. It's Caleb Downs, and it's solely because we haven't really seen Arch Manning and what he can do. I mean, when you put out tape against UL Monroe, that is a whole different world than an Ohio State defense in just terms of just pure how they attack an offense. So, while I think Arch Manning can get to that point to be the best player on the field, week one, that's not the case. Plus, we also have to factor in they're going into the shoe. This is a whole different conversation. If they were coming down to UT, if they were coming down to Austin, I might be inclined to lean Arch Manning's way just because of that home crowd. But when you walk into the shoe, it's a different scenario. It's a whole different yard and a whole different ball game. And you've got to go Caleb Downs here just purely for what he gives you on the back end of that defense.
Yeah, so Corey, what is the Texas perspective of Arch Manning versus Caleb Downs?
I think the perspective is basically how much you're going to put in Arch's play. I think all offseason we've heard from Coach Sarkisian saying it's not all about Arch. It's not all about Arch. He has good people around him, including the running backs. And so with this conversation, I'm interested to see how I start game plans against a dude like Caleb Downs, because last year we saw what he did on the goal line. He was the guy that made the play on that toss. And so Caleb has already proven his worth. Arch hasn't. And so does Sark kind of use the running game a lot more to kind of get things started and then eventually open things up with the play action, which then Arch's not going to be able to show everything that he can if that's the game plan. So I'm definitely going with Caleb, clean sweep, but everyone is excited to see what Arch can put on tape.
100%. And I think the other thing too that we also have to talk about is this Texas team is replacing 12 players from the NFL draft. They had 12 players go in the past draft, 5 on defense, 7 on offense. And they're also revamping the offensive line. I think they're looking at 4 new offensive line starters, including a guy that I really like in Trevor Goosby, which, every time I turn on my all-22 tape, I love turning on Dalton Miller, who has his own Patreon, shameless plug. He has a very good Patreon, has up-to-date footage, even already has the week 0 footage up. So if you are not subscribed to Dalton's Patreon, make sure you go check that out. But when you look at Trevor Goosby, you see the makings of a future franchise left tackle. You see a guy that's very smooth in pass protection. You see a guy that has the footwork and the ability to be that star left tackle for the future of this Texas team, but also the future of an NFL franchise. So I think having a guy like Trevor Goosby protecting Arch's blind side is going to absolutely make his life much, much better. But also, how is, like you said, Corey, how is Sark going to dial up those protections against an Ohio State defensive line that's also replacing starters of their own? They're also replacing Jack Sawyer and JTT. They're replacing 4 starters over there. So it's going to be a very fun conversation in terms of the trenches. But Owen, how do you think, if you're Steve Sarkisian, how are you protecting Arch Manning in this game?
I'm definitely going to take advantage of that inexperienced Ohio State defensive line. Like you were just talking about, Bill, where we have some guys on our radar right now between players, the D tackle. I'm forgetting his name, the Ohio State D tackle that is going to be in this upcoming class that kind of didn't get a ton of run because they had.
Jackson.
Thank you. Yes, Jackson. Specifically because they had not only they lose Jack Sawyer and JTT, but they lost Tyleik Williams. They lost their other 3-tech player that went in the 4th or 5th round to the Rams. That again I'm blanking on. There were so many Ohio State defensive linemen. It's hard to keep them straight.
Yeah, the draft happened, so the names just get erased because we have to put 400 new names in our heads for the next 12 months.
Is it Ty Hamilton? Is that the name I'm thinking of?
It was. Yes.
So they lost four starters
Williams too.
Yeah, and Tyleik Williams. So they lost 4 starters along that defensive line. I'm using a lot of moving pockets, utilizing March Manning's mobility to his advantage, using a guy like Goosby who has that athleticism to be like a top-tier tackle who can work in a moving pocket and get that defensive line moving back and forth, not allowing them to get established and get set up, and doing a lot more things to get Arch in a position where he's comfortable that even if he takes a bit longer to get through his reads or you're not able to dial up a more designed play, that he can get the ball to where it needs to be or he has opportunities to make plays with his legs more freely so that way they aren't able to kind of pin him in and cage rush him or you're not just doing a drop back passing game and being, okay, Arch, go. Beat this top-tier Ohio State defense that just shredded Notre Dame when they had in the national championship game that were turning starters like Caleb Downs and Sonny Styles and a bunch of other players that we are going to be talking about on this podcast. So I think he needs to pull out some of his deeper bag when it comes to getting Arch Manning more comfortable, as opposed to if you're going against a lower end team, you can allow him to kind of settle in and be more of a true quarterback.
So Durst, where do you have Trevor Goosby in your spectrum of offensive line players?
Yeah, I have him as a top 50 guy. Let me see if I can pull up real quick, like where I have him on my my actual rankings of offensive linemen. But I have him 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I have him as my 5th offensive tackle in my in a top 50 prospect. So I'm excited about him. Of course, the thing is he only has 2 starts in his career, if I understood correctly. But one of them was at left tackle versus Georgia SEC championship, and one was at right tackle against Arizona State. So it's like, he got to play, like top level teams, and especially when it came to Georgia, where he was playing against Michael Williams and Jelon Walker, and he looked every bit as good to me as Kelvin Banks did. So I'm really optimistic about him, but it's it's hard for me to put him in the first round when he's only a redshirt sophomore with 2 starts. But he looks really impressive. So I think he's got just everything you're looking for in terms of the size and length and physicality. I think it's just seasoning and experience is all we need. So Corey, what are you seeing? And are you able to, like, are you actually going to the practices there and things? And
Yeah, for sure. So we get some availability time. It's not like other colleges, though. I've heard some of my homies, they get like the full practice time. We don't get that. We probably get around 20 and 30 minutes, which is enough. We're getting video, but I'm also looking at different things. And you mentioned Trevor's 2 starts. I would also like to throw in A&M. Kelvin Banks went down, and Trevor had to come in and go against a guy like Shamar Stewart, who went in the first round.
Yeah, it was first half, right?
Yeah, he went down the first half. Yeah, exactly. So, Trevor had to play the whole second half at left tackle. And so you talked about him playing left and right tackle. So he has the versatility. You talked about the way he can move. I just want to throw in as well, he has a basketball background. His little brother is a real big Texas recruit right now. He's a 4-star prospect in basketball. From what Arch Manning tells us, Trevor is also a really good basketball player. He can dunk. He does 360 dunks according to Arch. And so you're talking about a left tackle doing stuff like that on the basketball court. That's scary. And so he's a physical freak. And I think that's something that a lot of people are going to be able to see this year with the more opportunities he gets. And so, yeah, I like Trevor a lot. I would argue he could be better than a Kelvin Banks at the end of his career, just because of the physical traits that he has, unlike Kelvin.
Cool. So here's a question for the draft audience. Better offensive tackle prospect, Josh Simmons or Trevor Goosby? And you can use whatever data, whether it's the rank on the big board or your grade or gut feel. Anybody want to take that one first?
I'll take it because
Simmons would have probably he got hurt. Was it a PCL or patellar tendon or something like that? Basically blew out his
torn
knee pretty
patellar
early.
tendon. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, he already. I mean, he made it in the first round anyway. But I mean, I think he was well on his way to being a top 10 pick if he hadn't like blown out his knees. So, I mean, so we kind of saw what he can be, and Goosby was still kind of looking for that. But it wouldn't surprise me if Goosby ended up being like maybe a top 10 pick if he ended up like playing as well as I think he can. But what do you guys think?
I had Simmons as my number one tackle last year's class. Excluding the injury, his tape was the best. He was already at a point where you're drafting, you're expecting to come and be a day one starter left tackle. And for Goosby, like I think if he can get to where Simmons is, that's probably where I would expect him to be, unless he's like my number one overall player in the class in which he comes out, whether it's this year or the following season. I don't think there's going to be there's not a lot of room to be better than a Josh Simmons. Not to say he can't be similar, if not slightly better, but I don't think there's a lot of room for error to get there because I was just that high on Simmons. But for Goosby, it just comes down to, can he take what he's shown in limited action and continue to improve on that and show what he showed across a full season when teams have tape on him, when they're game planning specifically for him at left tackle. Like if he's able to go out there and continue to show that, not only show off that athleticism, but to continue to be a technically sound blocker and perform that way across multiple games against higher level competition more consistently, then you can start talking about it. But I think right now it's more of an unfair comparison. Like you're not doing a full on projection of where you think Goosby can continue to go.
Yeah, so I'm going to take the flip side. I'm going to say that Trevor Goosby is the better prospect, because we also have to think Josh Simmons wasn't the Josh Simmons that we know before coming to Ohio State, because he was at Arizona State prior to that and played right tackle, hadn't really played a blindside tackle. Doesn't mean he couldn't, but if I'm looking at the two prospects and where they were in their draft cycle, obviously Trevor Goosby, a redshirt sophomore, so we may see him this year, but likely in 2027, depends on how he comes out, versus where we saw Josh Simmons as a redshirt sophomore. The ceiling is much higher on Goosby. So for me, if I had to project it out, I see a path where Goosby could be an offensive tackle one, and like Owen, Josh Simmons was my OT one if he were all healthy and good. Obviously, we saw how that patellar tendon wore out, and now he ended up at 32 to Kansas City, and now the entire league looks like we're crazy. So I would take Goosby as a redshirt sophomore over Simmons as a redshirt sophomore. But if we're comparing them as finished products, then obviously Simmons is much further along now. But if we get to the end of this season or even the end of next season heading into that draft cycle, I'm inclined to take Goosby. I think Goosby's the better prospect.
Okay, so Corey, here's a question for you. Out of all of the wide receivers in this game, between Ohio State and Texas, which are draft eligible, adding that qualifier.
Key factor.
Yep. Which wide receivers do you like?
I really like DeAndre Moore Jr. I'm not going to lie to you. Being able to talk to him these past couple of weeks, he made a comment that really struck my eye. And he said that his goals for this season, of course, to win the SEC championship, to win the national championship. But his personal goal is to be the first wide receiver taken in the draft and be a first-round talent. And when he said that, DeAndre's more of like a funny guy. Like he had a lot of personality when he talks to us. He was straight serious. Like he didn't smirk. He didn't laugh. He didn't chuckle. Straight face. I want to be a first-round talent. I believe I am a first-round wide receiver. Simple as that. And so when I heard that, I was like, okay, respect. And the thing that doubled down for me was Ryan Wingo, who a lot of people expect next year to be a big-time draft pick. He said, I think Demo is a guy that can go first round because I listen to him. I follow Demo. Everything I do is based off of what DeAndre does. And so when I'm hearing that from the guy who all we expect to be a first round or a second round talent is following a guy that we're not really talking about as much to be at that same level, makes me think maybe we're tripping. Because Wingo's in the room with them every single day. And so that's why I'm believing in DeAndre more and more and more. Sorry for the play on words there. But he can run the full route tree. He's a hell of a blocker. And I think those are the two biggest things when it comes to the next level. And DeAndre's been able to prove that in the first year. But now I think this next year being the guy, I'm excited to see what all he can produce. And so I really like DeAndre Moore Jr. coming out.
Yeah. So I love doing these shows. So Bill, I need you to put on your funny paint cap, and I need you to paint me a picture based upon what you have on DeAndre Moore.
Yes.
Paint the picture that he goes in round one based upon what you've already seen of him on tape and what he has to do to get ahead of the guys on your board.
Listen, so with DeAndre Moore, he is a guy that has some of the best body control that you've seen from a wide receiver prospect. He can adjust to off-target throws and just like contort his body in midair. He looks like Cirque du Soleil up there when he's contorting his body in midair. But the biggest thing, and this is the one thing that coaches in the NFL are going to love about DeAndre Moore, and Corey didn't touch on it, but I'm going to, serve it up on a tee and hammer it out of the park. He is a nasty run blocker. He will block a cornerback. He will pick someone up and put them in the Uber outside of the stadium in run blocking. And the thing is, those are the types of things that you have to do at the next level to get into the first round. There are a lot of teams that we see that have this no block, no rock philosophy. The Los Angeles Chargers, for example. The other thing is, he's a very good hands catcher. He's a natural hands catcher. And he extends away from his frame very easily. The big thing, though, is that he times out well in terms of his speed and his testing numbers. But he doesn't play to that number consistently. This is a guy, when you look at his speed, you're probably looking at a 4.4, probably a 4.41, maybe even a 4.39, 4.38 guy in terms of the speed. He can fly, but when you turn on the tape, you don't see it. So that would be my big thing, is that I need to see him play to that speed, but then also in press coverage situations, the release just kind of needs to get better. And mainly he relies too heavy on his hesitation, like he's trying to cross someone over at the line of scrimmage, which works, but he's got to develop a better release package. And I know Steve's got the comp for him of Tyler Lockett. Excuse me. My comp for him is a Sterling Shepard-esque type of receiver. So when you see Sterling Shepard and how great he was, that he didn't go first round, obviously, but I think that's what DeAndre Moore could end up being. But yeah, I need him to be able to play up to that speed, especially because of no fault of his own. He's following in the footsteps of guys like Matthew Golden, Isaiah Bond, Xavier Worthy, which creates a subconscious bias of draft scouts and talent evaluators of Texas wide receiver equals fast, which means when you see DeAndre Smith, you see Texas wide receiver fast, but I don't see it on the tape.
Can I ask a question? Any worries or doubts about his size?
So that's a very good question. And I like that question. You're talking 6 foot 195. If he were
that's a 6 foot is.
You think that's generous?
Generous.
I mean, I've stood next to DeAndre Moore many times, and I'm not 6 foot. So yeah, I'm just say that. I'll just say that. But yeah,
that's fair. So I think if we're talking a 5'10", 195, and even then, here's the thing: my top wide receiver on my board, KC Concepcion, is 5'11", 180 pounds. I think a size constraint is concerning if you don't play with length. If he's 6 foot 195 and he looks alligator armed when he's going for catches, that's a concern. But 6 foot 195 and he's fully stretching out, or even 5'11", 195 and fully stretching out, now I'm not as concerned, because in the NFL, we've seen wide receivers get smaller because we've seen some of the best wide receivers do some of their best damage in the slot. Guys like Jerry Jeudy, guys like Xavier Worthy. There is a market for smaller, faster wide receivers in the NFL because they're game changers. So I'm not as...
So I was going to say, Owen, where do you have DeAndre Moore, and can you paint a picture where you see him as the top wide receiver?
So I don't know if I can paint him as like the top wide receiver, but I do definitely see a pathway for him to get into the first round, kind of similar to what Bill was saying and piggybacking off of that, where I have DeAndre Moore with my player positional multiplier to get him up to where I think he could be drafted at. I have him as a third round player right now, with the tape being more of like a fourth round grade. So I do think if he's able to come out and be as dominant and be kind of more of the key player, because he was playing alongside Matthew Golden last year and to extent during the season, Isaiah Bond while he was healthy. He has an opportunity to step in and really take over as that 1A or 1B wide receiver for this offense, where we're expecting it to be a lot more pass happy. They brought in Jack Endries, but I think the receivers are going to have the most opportunity to step up and gain more target share and able to put themselves out there more. And I do agree that I think Moore will time better than he plays, kind of similar to a guy like Golden we saw last year, where Golden was in a role where he wasn't ever asked to be that straight up burner like he was when he was at Houston. So now DeAndre Moore, who has similar kind of speed, maybe not as fast as Golden, but has enough speed to be kind of an outside deep threaded player. He was never really asked to be that for Texas's offense last year. If he's able to dial that up a bit and be able to show that kind of in the Isaiah Bond role specifically, I do think that can unlock an element to his game that you will see start to become more coveted. And with the fact that there's not that many top tier wide receivers at the top of this draft class, like it's very similar to last year, where I think there's maybe one or two guys that you think you can probably put in your first round mock and you'd be pretty confident with it. But even then, like, there's different players that everyone else has. Like Bill has Concepcion as wide receiver 1. I had Denzel Boston as wide receiver 1. I have Concepcion, I think, a couple wide receivers down from that. So there's so much fluctuation right now with this class that if more, especially right out the gates in the first few games against a team like Ohio State, to bring it back to the game and we're prepping for this upcoming Saturday, you could see him take a big leap and get some early on hype if he can exhibit some more of that stuff and be more of a focal point in this offense, where last year he was mostly just a complementary piece to Golden and Gunnar Helm and Isaiah Bond and that whole offensive scheme they had going on. He was more of a wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4 in that offense last year.
So Durst, how about you? Where are you in DeAndre Moore?
Yeah, similar to Owen, I do have him as a third rounder, although for me it would be on the very, very back end of the third round. The size doesn't really concern me too much because I like the idea of, building my receiving core like a basketball team with a variety of different, body types and sizes and skill sets and stuff. So, take advantage of the mismatch, whether or not it's a smaller guy against a linebacker in the slot, or it's a big, tall, fast wide receiver on the outside against an undersized, defensive back. But to me, he's primarily a slot receiver, and he's had a breakout game against Georgia last year with 9 catches. I think he had 4 or 5 against the Ohio State game. He's a space creator. He creates a lot of space before and after the catch, and I felt that my main concern probably wasn't his size, but I felt like he had a lot of schemed releases. So, of course, Sarkisian is one of the best when it comes to being an offensive mind, and so I just kind of felt whether or not it was some motion or bunch sets. I just felt like a lot of his releases were schemed open, and I'm just kind of curious where he's going to be in the pecking order because we know Sarkisian likes to throw to the running backs a lot. They had like 75 or 80 receptions between the two running backs last year, and then they also featured the tight end quite a bit, and then we already talked about Wingos. So I'm curious where what DeAndre Moore is going to be in the pecking order, because if he's the true wide receiver 1 in a Sarkisian offense is always going to get the attention of the NFL.
Okay, so there's a couple of other wide receivers in this game. Carnell Tate for Ohio State, and Brandon Inniss from Ohio State, as well as DeAndre Moore from Texas. And I think those 3 are the highest draft eligible wide receivers. So, Owen, where are you on Carnell Tate versus DeAndre Moore?
So Tate, I have graded higher. He's the guy for me that I think right now. So with me, he has a second round grade, whereas Moore, like similar to Durst, kind of back into the third. Really where I can see him more predictably going as of right now, but for me, more towards the front end of that 4th round grade for me with Moore. Whereas with Tate, he has it. There's no questions about his size specifically. He's this tall, long-legged wide receiver on the outside, more of a typical X prototype. He's not the super fast burner, but he's got long strides. And while he isn't the quickest in the short area and being able to create quick area separation with his routes, he's able to do some more deceptive things when it comes to double moves and working the post and the seam as an outside receiver. So I do think for him, he's got more of a floor for me than a guy like Moore does. And I do think Durst brought up a great point. that Moore, especially in that Georgia game where like that was the big breakout, a ton of his reps that he won big on were doing short area motions on the same side, going from the outside into the slot to create motion to the slot, creating space, getting him in free, and being more that Sarkisian schemed up touches guy in that game specifically. And that was his best game he had all season. So for me, a guy like Tate, while having other players and being a true like number 2 outside receiver, and whereas Moore was more of that 3-4 guy, I think he's shown a bit more while playing opposite, a top tier wide receiver in Jeremiah Smith at Ohio State. So I do think for me, he has a higher floor as that kind of body type, that archetype, and he still has room to grow when it comes to. He only had 11 opportunities for contested catches according to PFF last year, and after watching all those reps, a lot of those were contested catches in the sense that it was in traffic and he's trying to fight for the ball at the catch point while fighting through contact, not as much going up and high pointing and attacking above the rim, where I do think he can succeed. He has the size, he has the ability, he has the length. So my questions for Tate is a lot more of just opportunity, being the number 2 receiver, getting more passes that can let him show off that a jump ball ability, and then if that can be added and be a strength of his tape while watching, I think that can boost him up a bit more and be talked about in that first round hype. Whereas with Moore, I think there's going to be a lot more question marks based off of where his fit is with the offense. Is his athleticism really going to translate? There were some, even in the Georgia game, there was some like really bad concentration drop he had. So there's some things he has to clean up with his hands at the top of being like a more established himself as more of a true wide receiver. So I do think Tate's more of the cleaner projection as of right now, and does have still room to grow with what he can put on tape to better his stock.
Durst, where do you weigh in on Tate versus Moore versus Inniss?
Yeah, so I've talked about this guy a couple of times, but he's turned out to be kind of my guy, because even when I did my Ohio State board, I got like one comment. It was like, how can you have Tate? How can you have Inniss above Tate? But my guy has been Brandon Inniss, and my big thing is I think he's going to project very well into that Jackson Smith and Jigba role that Ohio State has. It's sort of a featured piece in that offense. You got a new quarterback in Jaylon Saying?
Julian Saying.
Julian Saying. Okay, I tried to combine those two into one. So so he's a highly touted 5-star prospect, but he is a guy that's going to be getting his first start. So I think he's going to be looking for the easier passes and not trying to like force things deep. And so I think the easier pass is going to be to the slot receivers and maybe to a lesser extent the tight end. So Brandon Inniss is about 6 foot tall, 203. He was I think the 5th wide receiver in that high school recruiting class. And again, when I talk about the Jackson Smith and Jigba role, we're talking about 1,606 yards back in 2021. And then Emeka Bukba basically took over the same role in 2023 and 24. And in 2024, had 1,011 yards. So he's got kind of a choppy step to him, and he kind of he's more of a quicker than fast. He's not like a guy that's going to be explosive like downfield or anything like that, but he's short, choppy steps to quickly maneuver in the short intermediate levels of the field. And he also has 17 combined kickoff and punt returns. So he's got that returner man kind of quickness that I like. So I actually have Inniss as higher than both Tate and Moore. Although again, this is a pretty big projection because Tate has been much more productive over Inniss over the last 2 years. But I think a lot of it was just the opportunity and them sort of needing an outside receiver at Ohio State.
So, Bill, where are you on Carnell Tate and Brandon Inniss?
Yeah, so I fall into the Owen category. I have Carnell Tate higher. Carnell Tate is my 22nd overall prospect with a 2nd round grade. Just because when you see Carnell Tate, you see a guy that can, is an advanced route runner on the outside, sinks his hips with a purpose, and it has that really good body control, but also is a hands catcher through and through, and is technical about it and is reliable about it. And he thrives in the intermediate part of the field where timing is key and timing is crucial, and where the NFL is going right now in that 10 to 20 yard marker. That's where Carnell Tate thrives. And for my comp, and Corey, if you've never seen, I am the comp king. I have a comp for pretty much every player that I talk about. My comp for Carnell Tate is George Pickens if he wasn't mental. And if you take away the mental part of George Pickens and just have a sane wide receiver, it's Carnell Tate. He does some good things. It's a very good receiver. But
you made Owen choke on air with that one.
and that's true. But like I see also Durst's side of Inniss as well. I think if you're going to compare kind of apples to apples, DeAndre Moore fits that more of that Brandon Inniss kind of slot change of pace type of role. Because when you look at Texas's other wide receivers, obviously they're not draft eligible in this class. So let me preface that. But when you have guys like Ryan Wingo and then guys like Emmanuel Mosley, who may or may not play, maybe question if he wasn't mental, absolutely. Emmanuel Mosley, kind of questionable for this game. I think those two guys would kind of match up of a Ryan Wingo and Emmanuel Mosley versus a Carnell Tate, Jeremiah Smith. And then in the slot, you have DeAndre Moore versus Brandon Inniss. Obviously, Jeremiah Smith. Hey, that's my new nickname. If he wasn't mental, absolutely. You can go ahead and just clip that and have that be the short for this episode.
You better believe it. So.
But yeah, I think that's where you're kind of looking is Tate, and how I would have it is Tate, Moore, Inniss in that order.
Yeah. So Corey, I don't know how well versed you are on the Ohio State players, so I'm always asking you about the Texas guys.
Yeah.
If I'm all you have to do is give me a cue that you can talk about the Ohio State players too, and we can make this more of a free for all. But
I just have one thing on this conversation that before we hopped on, we talked about how I was just on a podcast with Ryan Watts. And of course he's a former Longhorn, but he's also a former Buckeye. And we had that conversation about the wide receiver DB matchup, and he said it himself, like everyone's talking about Jeremiah, but Tate's a dude. And so Watts had to go against Tate in practice back in his Ohio State days. So, hearing that from Watts, he got that respect from Tate. So he got my respect. Anybody that Ryan respects, I respect. So to put a bow in that conversation, yeah, I guess Tate's my guy in that conversation just because of the homie said so. So.
Okay. And, if there's if a running back touches the ball in this game, there's a reasonable percentage that we can talk about him for the draft. So Quintrevion Wisner from Texas, CJ Baxter from Texas, CJ Donaldson from Ohio State are all running backs in this game, which are draft eligible. Now, my understanding is some people are predicting Texas will have one running back in the draft. We just don't know which one it's going to be, and the other one's going to go back to school. But, Corey, how do you handicap the Texas running back room, and which of the two do you think is a better NFL prospect?
Man, that's going to be tough. That is one thing I'm excited to see during this game is how does Sark utilize touches when it comes to that room? Because Quintrevion Wisner, he's the only running back in the SEC that's returning. That was a 1,000-yard rusher last year. And I think that's a huge deal in that conference. And to prove his worth, because mind you, I watched Quintrevion in high school. And in high school, he wasn't really a real running back. He was lining up in a slot a lot. He was basically kind of like a gadget receiver at times. And so him coming to Texas to play running back wasn't really like a shock, but it was like, oh, okay, we'll see how this goes. Mind you, you had a 5-star in CJ Baxter coming in that not only come in, but he started as a true freshman over a dude like Jonathan Brooks, who could have won, should have won the Doak Walker if he didn't get hurt. And so that tells me a lot about CJ, is that he was able to win the battle over a dude like Brooks. And so I'm interested to see the touches. But to answer your question, I think CJ is probably the better NFL prospect because of the size, because of the pass blocking that he's able to provide. That's something that the NFL teams, they love running backs that can block. Then that's the reason why Sark picked him to be the starter as a true freshman, because he was the best blocking running back as a freshman. And so, of course, everyone's worried about the LCL and the PCL. Is that fully healthy? From what we're hearing in camp and what I've seen, he looks good. And so we'll see if the touches equate to that. But yeah, I think CJ may be the better NFL prospect, but I think production-wise, Quintrevion may be the one that has the most stats.
So, Durst, who do you think is the best running back prospect in this game?
Yeah, I like Baxter a lot. Back when Jonathan Brooks was there was some question whether or not he was going to come out for the draft or not. I'm like, he has to because he's going to lose his job to CJ Baxter next year, and so who knows whether that would have been true or not. But of course, he ended up having like injury after injury, and I'm not sure he's in the NFL anymore and stuff. He's but I really like Baxter what he showed in 2023. Now again, he had a preseason injury last year with tearing his LCL and PCL. So we saw absolutely zero snaps of him in 2024. But, to me, strength, play strength, power, leg drive, contact balance can grind out the difficult yards and wear out the defense. As soon as he can line up wide and run a couple of routes, his 0 drops in his career. Again, career being only one season. Looked like a potential workhorse before his injury and perhaps the next great Texas back. So he basically I put like an asterisk, but he's like my number 3 running back in this class if he's healthy.
So, Owen, how about you? Who is your favorite running back prospect of the 3 in this game?
So, just for reference, for anybody who hasn't been following our journey over this past summer, I was on both podcasts covering Texas and Ohio State when we covered them this past summer. We were doing our breakdowns per individual team. So I was able to watch all 3 of these guys tape in preparation for this. And I think for me personally, I'm not the biggest fan of the majority of them, and compared to consensus, like I'm not the biggest fan of all of them. With Baxter, the only reason why is because we didn't get to see him last year. I think based off of this freshman tape, it's super impressive for a guy with his size, his athletic profile, being 6'1", 230 listed on PFF and being able to work the way he did. I do think he's the one not only with the highest upside, but right now he's probably my favorite of the 3 when it comes out. I wasn't the biggest Wisner fan. I did appreciate what he was able to do for Texas last year when it came to his implementation in the offense and how he was able to be effective with their blocking schemes. I do think, similar to what Corey said, I think based off of how he operates in that offense, he can put up good numbers for this team. I just think looking at them when it comes to combining the athletic profiles and seeing kind of that upside when it comes to what you're looking for in a running back as NFL draft prospect specifically, Baxter, I do think clears him quite a bit if he does recover for what we've seen his freshman year. And then Donaldson, it was a lot of kind of similar stuff I saw with Wisner when he was at West Virginia, where I wasn't overly impressed by his athletic profile, even though he is more of a bigger back. But all these guys really can have more of a power profile at times when it comes to working even as a zone runner. So there's a lot of times where you're going to see Baxter come in specific situations and Wisner spells him for different things. I do think Baxter overall, though, is going to be my favorite and probably the one that gets drafted the highest of these 3 if I had to put a bet on it. So that's probably where I'd lean for. But I'm not the biggest fan, at least right now. As of today, if I had to draft one of these guys, I'm not over ecstatic to grab any of them without knowing Baxter's health situation, and the other 2 I'm just not as high on.
Bill.
Yeah, so I'm with Durst. CJ Baxter is my number 3 running back on my big board. And the big thing for me is when I look at the 2, CJ Baxter is a guy, built like a workhorse, every down type of back, and you see it on his freshman tape, running with authority between the tackles, legitimate second level speed. When I watch his game, I see a lot of Joe Mixon. I see a lot of Joe Mixon in a physical workhorse, legitimate second level speed, but then also Quintrevion Wisner, when I thought about it, for him, he is a perfect complementary back to what CJ Baxter does. And for me, that's why I have the comp of Felix Jones for Quintrevion Wisner. So when you think back, you had Darren McFadden, who is this legitimate workhorse, true speedster, true burner. And then you had Felix Jones, who would come in as kind of more of a little bit of the thunder, but he also had some juice to him too. And I think that's what Wisner is going to be for Baxter, is he's going to come in, he's going to be kind of that rotational piece that has some juice, but he doesn't have nearly as much juice as Baxter does. And I think the biggest difference between the 2 is Baxter's also a really natural pass catcher, especially on swing routes and check downs. This is a guy that Arch Manning is going to look for early. If he's healthy, he's going to be looking for him as a safety valve, because there's nothing that can help a young quarterback more than a check down, than a swing route that gets the ball out of his hands and lets his playmakers go to work.
And the one thing I would just say to kind of put a bow on things is go back to that Alabama game. As a true freshman, who did Sark put the ball in the hands of C.J. Baxter, to end the game? Alabama knew they had to run the football. Texas had to run the football to run out the clock. And Baxter was able to get the first downs. And so to me, that said a lot in that moment that Sark trusted an 18-year-old to go out there in Tuscaloosa and to close the game out. And now it's just, okay, can he build on top of that after this injury? And that's what I'm excited to see.
Yeah, the first true freshman running back to start a season opener since Ricky Williams in 1995. That's
a big deal.
Something. Yeah, that's huge.
Yep. So, Bill, did you want to check back to your wide receiver question before we move to some other positions?
Yeah, so I'm going to kind of flip the script a little bit. We were talking about wide receivers. I'm going to kind of flip to defensive backs, and obviously there's one big wide receiver in this game, and that's not draft eligible from Ohio State, and Jeremiah Smith. But Corey, from a defensive back perspective, tell me, how is Malik Muhammad going to control Jeremiah Smith in this game? Just how?
Okay, yeah, that's a great question. And it's funny because I actually talked to Malik about this 2 days ago. So we was in a press conference, and the question got brought up is, have you asked PK, which is Pete Kwiatkowski, the defensive coordinator for Texas, that you can handle Jeremiah Smith? Have you told him that? That was a question to Malik. And Malik answered, I'm not going to share what PK and I talked about, but yeah, it was something to that extent of I can handle him one-on-one. And so when I heard that, I then followed up and asked him, well, do you like to follow or do you like to stay on your side of the field? And he says, I'm a follow guy as long as it doesn't disrupt the coverage. And so that made me really think, what are we about to see? Like, are we going to see Malik really follow around Jeremiah Smith? Because if he's telling his defensive coordinator, I got him, and two, if he's telling me he wants to follow, that tells me that he wants that assignment. And so I think if I'm Malik, I'm probably pushing heavy on this is my one shot where I'm going to be 100% healthy for the rest of the year. This is the one time I get to play against a top tier receiver to look at their schedule. There's not another big time receiver on Texas' schedule, probably outside of Noah Thomas against Georgia. And that's all the way later in the year. And so this is his one shot to prove I'm a first round talent. And I know he wants to prove that. And so that is the matchup I'm really looking forward to. Will PK let him follow Jeremiah Smith around? He probably won't be the whole game, but let's see if it's 60%, 70% of the game is Malik matched up with Jeremiah. And I think he wants that challenge because I think he's a first round talent. I really do think so. Muhammad's been able to do his thing since freshman year. So it's his time to be the CB1. And what better way to prove it than against Jeremiah Smith?
So, Anthony, I'm with you there. Owen, where are you on if you had to place a bet on Malik Muhammad shutting down Jeremiah Smith?
I think the better bet is how often are we going to see Michael Taaffe rotating down and taking away half the field or double manning Jeremiah Smith
every play.
Is it like that? That's if you're going to say Malik Muhammad's going to shadow him, there's going to be a safety rotating that way every time. I'm not that I say I don't believe in Malik Muhammad. I do think he's a good player. He's someone I do think can improve a bit and has an opportunity to establish himself as a first-round corner if he does come out there and show out against a Jeremiah Smith. And even if he isn't shadowing him the whole game, but there's still a Carnell Tate or an Inniss coming at him and he's able to still show out. Like, this is a good opportunity for him to not only show out against a guy who we're anticipating being one of the top picks in the following year's draft, but going against receivers who we've talked about previously in this podcast alone that are going to be guys looked at as like, okay, how big of a jump can they make? Can Carnell Tate become a first-round pick? Can Brandon Inniss really take the next step with the given opportunity? And if he's able to shut down even one of those guys, if not the top guy, there's still going to be a boost to his stock. So I do think I don't think Malik Muhammad is going to get the 101 Darrell Revis on an island matchup. But I do think that he'll get opportunities to do that with some of the other wide receivers. And even if he can, with the double team, contain Jeremiah Smith, and that'll be key for them winning this game. I do think that'll definitely boost his stock in this game specific, or in this after this game specifically.
Yeah. So, Durst, how do you stack up the Texas cornerback? So we've started Malik Muhammad, but I do want to shout out, was it Guilbeau?
Guilbeau.
Jaylon Guilbeau, is that how you say that?
Guilbeau.
So Dalton Miller had Guilbeau in his top 10 coming out of summer scouting when Dalton Miller podcasted on this channel about a month ago. So how do you stack up the two Texas corners?
So I did not watch Guilbeau. I didn't realize he was that highly regarded. And as for Malik Muhammad, I like him. I have him as a round 3 guy. Started games as a true freshman, all 16, 2024. Good size, length, speed, recovery, reactionary athleticism. To me, I think a little bit more of a soft press and zone corner that that will come up and support the run. But to me, like him one-on-one with Jeremiah Smith would be kind of like Greg Newsome against an in your prime Julio Jones. I just think athletically, it's just a little bit of a mismatch there. So, and you don't really see in college shadow coverage much. Like I can't really think of the last corner that really would sort of like like just follow somebody across the field so much. But I mean, maybe did Jalen Ramsey do that? But so I don't really. To me, if anything, I probably would have Malik Muhammad shadow Tate and then double cover Jeremiah Smith. But what they did last year, I mean, Jeremiah Smith only had 1 reception in that game against Texas last year, and so I actually watched like about half that game today, trying to figure out how the heck did they do that, and I think a lot of it was just getting pressure on the quarterback. It was just sort of like you never really looked that direction on some plays, and then a couple of times they did, then then they were able to get some interceptions and things. So the Texas dropped their one of the linebackers on one where Will Howard had thrown it to kind of try to force the ball, and he wasn't the kind of guy that would like give it with touch, layer it over the linebacker and before the the cornerback that's there. So I do think you want to bracket coverage him, and I don't think you're gonna. I think you're gonna see a good game by Jeremiah Smith. I don't think you're gonna be able to shut him down 2 games in a row.
Okay, so Bill, I'm going to modify a question a little bit for you. Who is the second best defensive back in this game?
Across both teams or just Texas?
Yep, across both teams. And it's a loaded question because Caleb Downs, we're assuming, is everybody's number 1 defensive back of the class. But while Bill is pontificating his answer, safety Michael Taaffe from Texas, Guilbeau, the corner from Texas. I'm looking at the list. Davison, Igbinosun from Ohio State. Jermaine Mathews, the corner from Ohio State. Malik Muhammad, the corner from Texas. Were all names in this game that are draft eligible in the defensive backfield. So, what do you think?
So I'll modify your answer to your question. So if you're talking the second best corner in this game, it's Jermaine Mathews from Ohio State. Because when you look at him, you see a guy that's elite in terms of recovery speed, very smooth in the hips, can be change a direction like on a dime, good football instincts. Obviously, the concern is the technique gets a little sloppy because he relies on his God-given ability and his athletic ability. But at the next level, that's going to get put out very quickly. If you talk about safeties, if your top safety is Caleb Downs, then obviously your second best safety is Michael Taaffe from Texas. The big thing with Taaffe is his size and his frame. This is a guy, he's listed at 6'195", but Verified has him come in at significantly smaller than that. But he is just he is what I like to call a supercomputer on the back end of that defense, because he just diagnoses route combinations before the ball's even snapped. It's almost like not only did he study the Texas playbook, but he studied the opponent's playbook too. And he is probably a true film junkie. This is a guy, like, you normally don't give your green dot to a safety position. You normally like your linebackers to wear the green dot. But if you had to put a green dot on a safety, it would be a Michael Taaffe. He also just has natural hands and a good ball tracking ability on a vertical route to be able to play through a receiver's hands. My concern is he's got average recovery speed. He's a linear athlete. He's a straight line guy. You get him going straight one way, he's good. But if you ask him to change direction, it's a concern. And then also his tackling technique. I hope that he is watching, because Michael, if you're watching, go ahead and zoom in on my eyes here. Stop leading with your helmet, my brother. Please. That's the CFP quarterfinal game against Arizona State, that non-targeting call that we all saw where he led with his helmet. that's going to get you tossed in the NFL. It's not going to get you flagged. It's going to get you tossed. So I implore you, work on that technique. But yeah, if you're talking second best cornerback, it's Jermaine Mathews from Ohio State. Second best safety, it's Michael Taaffe from Texas. If you're talking second best across both after Caleb Downs, it's Malik Muhammad from Texas.
I would love to know y'all.
Is Muhammad the second best defensive back in this game for you, or is your board different?
So my board's different. I have Taaffe as the second best across both. A lot of what Bill said, I think the question about his size is definitely going to be something I'm going to be interested in seeing when we get the absolute verified measurables once we get to the end of the draft process and we're getting through the combines and the pro days and we're seeing what his verified measurables are, because he's a guy that when he's in the right spots all the time in coverage, he makes good plays on the ball. And like Bill was saying, he is really good when it comes to linear speed. Like when he's able to come down and drive on routes in front of him and be able to attack underneath routes and then close the gap, and he can lay some big hits. So he plays above that size, above that weight class, even what he's listed at. So I do think, and that's why I kind of brought it up when we were talking about how they're going to kind of contain Jeremiah Smith, as having him be more of an underneath coverage player where he's not man up. You never want to have him in a position where he's going to have to shadow a player, but he's going to be that secondary complementary piece. And when he is able to do that and able to buzz down, even going over the top, ranging sideline to sideline, I think he's capable of doing that at safety. So I do think that a player that like that can be more of an impact. Whereas with these corners, I like a lot of them, whether it's their athletic profiles or what they've shown on tape previously, but there are still question marks with all of them for me. So I think if I'm looking for a player with the tape, I'm just, okay, that's the second best player on tape right now behind Caleb Downs. For me, it's going to be Michael Taaffe.
Durst, how about you? Who's the second best defensive back in this game for you?
So let me touch on Taaffe just a little bit. So, Bill just checks it out there. But, I mean, his verified through Dane Brugler is 175, and that would put him in the first percentile for safeties if you're looking at, like, the mock draftable database. So he's a former walk-in who gives maximum effort. He's played 43 games with 26 starts going into his fifth season. He's a free safety who combines processing and range. He's got good play speed, reads the quarterback's eyes and route combinations, about over 700 snaps on special teams. But he's also a former walk-in who has outlier size, who has maybe already maximized his ability to its fullest extent. So I think I'm probably the guy that's the lowest on him. I have him as a round 4 to round 6 guy because of the outlier size. But the guy that I'm refusing to quit on yet is Igbinosun. So I got Igbinosun. David said Igbinosun is a round 2 cornerback for Ohio State, and then I've got Jermaine Mathews a round 3 cornerback. But so Igbinosun's got the length that teams are looking for. Now, people who don't like him, they're completely justified in not liking him because he led the entire nation in passes. I was going to say passes defended, but penalties. So, if you had to put a bet on this game, don't have it be on who wins. Don't have it be on who under or the over. Have it be on if Davison Igbinosun has a pass interference penalty or a holding call, a defensive holding call, because you'll get that 100% of the time. But he was a freshman All-American in 2022 when he's playing at Ole Miss. He's got all the speed and length and athleticism to excel in man coverage. And I think he knows, what people and opponents and scouting coaches are saying about him. I'm sure he's worked on that. I don't think he's going to lead the nation in holding calls, 2 years in a row. So I think he's going to come back a little bit more disciplined this year. But he's the guy I would have as my number 2 guy.
So Heather's not here, and I know that she likes Igbinosun. So her assessment of Igbinosun when she did the Ohio State podcast with Owen and the Monday crew earlier was she'll cringe because he's going to be called for pass interference. Then she'll cringe because he's called for pass interference. Then he'll make the interception that wins the game in the last play of the game. Right? So the ceiling for the player is there. He has to clean up the negative.
I had a question for y'all, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Just about the draft grades. I know Durst, he said 4th to 6th for Taaffe. So I'm wondering about Taaffe, because that's been the topic of conversation, right? Taaffe came back just to improve his draft stock. And so everyone in that secondary last year would tell you, Jahdae Barron would say it, Andrew Makuba would say it. Taaffe led that secondary. because of what Bill mentioned, his mind. He controlled everything back there. And so how much do y'all factor that in when it comes to draft grades, knowing he was the mastermind behind that secondary, but of course the physical traits may not be there.
Yeah. So Owen, you want to take that?
Yeah, I think so. That's why I kind of distinguish it that, like, with his film grade specifically, that's where I have him as like a second round player for me, just because he does pop when it comes to his ability to anticipate plays and when it comes to what he does really well. Now, his size, ability, and what Bill touched on with his lateral agility and quickness, it negatively impacts maybe his man coverage grade specifically, but there's a lot of other factors that I'm looking at when grading out safeties film wise. Now, when you get to like the combine pro days, and when you're looking, if you continue, say he repeated what he did on the field this last season to this season, and
not an All-American season, yeah,
right, yeah. If he did that, I'm sure there'd be a lot more of a consensus when it comes to like, okay, he's going to get that bump in his style or a bump in his draft stock, but it's going to come down to for him what he measures out at, because if he's doing that and he says like, oh, I'm up to like 185, 190. And was still able to do that and weighs in probably, not as the biggest safety, but properly what you expect for more of a free safety type player in his position. I do think that'll improve his stock more so than anything he really does in the field this year. I'm more than sold on him as a mental player, as a football player on my team. It's going to be more so can you expand on your physical limitations right now? And that's going to be a big thing with his size specifically.
Yeah. So Anthony Russo, draft professor, who's here every Friday and Saturday. Corey, can you take that question?
Yeah, I definitely can. Warren Roberson, he's probably going to be in that star position, but he's been in a battle. That's been the biggest shock throughout camp. I would say that. There's a true freshman named Grayson Littleton from Tampa, Florida. He has been getting first team reps in that star position over Warren Roberson, who has been a part of the program for a couple of years now. So when that news came out and we're seeing on the field, it's like, who's that kid that's playing star right now? We had to learn who this kid was. Tampa, Florida, 4-star recruit, Grayson Littleton. And so you're going to see a lot from Grayson. Malik Muhammad actually talked about him in the availability this week, saying he was trying to coach up Grayson to calm his nerves for this big matchup because he knows Grayson's going to play. So I'm interested to see when the first group goes out there, is it going to be Warren Roberson or is it going to be Grayson Littleton? Is this two freshmen really going to come in here and take that star position? Because that's been the void right now since they're going to move Guilbeau from star to outside corner, similar to what Jahdae Barron did last year. Guilbeau's trying to get that draft stock up by proving he can cover. And so they're moving him from inside to outside. So there is a hole there inside. And we all thought Warren would fill it, but that hasn't been the case. This freshman has been filling that role. So we'll see if Warren even gets a lot of snaps or not. But for what we've been hearing and seeing, it's been this true freshman getting those snaps.
Nice. So why don't we pause? Because I know that Corey's going to have to drop here shortly. Corey, do you want to introduce yourself? We are having a really good Wednesday night.
Yeah.
Draft professor. A lot of people watching. Let everybody know who you are and what content you make and how to find you.
Yeah, for sure. So my name is Corey Mose. Nice to meet everybody out there. I am a sports anchor for the ABC station in Austin, Texas. So, of course, cover the Longhorns, but we also cover everything Austin, high school, soccer. Heck, we got the G League with the Austin Spurs. So we cover everything. And so if you want any content on Twitter, on Facebook, IG, TikTok, I post everywhere. And so it's just my name, Corey Mose. It's not Moses. It's just Mose. So it's very easy to find me because my name is, I guess it's kind of like it's on its own. There's no one else has Mose as the last name. So I'm grateful for that. And so if you just search me on all the different platforms, I post content mainly about like press conferences and different sound bites throughout the week that we get on X and Twitter. I give my personal thoughts along with those sound bites on TikTok and Instagram, and a kind of a mixture of both on Facebook. And so you don't just follow me for just one type of content. I give you different type of flavors, whatever you want between all my different platforms. So hopefully you'll bite on one of them because hopefully you like one of them. So yeah.
Well, it's been a pleasure having you on the podcast. We'll see if we can do a big finish after we go around the horn. Owen, you want to let everybody know about all of the work that you do?
Yeah, so I am a former scout at the University of Buffalo football, with their football program over there. And I've been doing the We Call It podcast now for it's already past 5 years at this point. We're over there. You can check out. I have the different podcasts. We had some of the other draft professors come on, including Bill Sparks, who came on, did our super early mock draft where we did have a couple Texas players and Anthony Hill Jr. And I think Malik Muhammad was in that first round mock, Bill, if I remember correctly. Yep. And so we've definitely talked about some of these guys together. And I'm also here all the time on the Draft Professor discussing the different draft prospects. When it was over the summer, I was doing the different team breakdowns and talking about even NFL teams with their schematics and what kind of players and type of players they like to target. So you can go check out those in the backlog. And as well, you can catch me throughout the regular season here on the Draft Professor, breaking down whether it's game previews or doing specific positional wash throughs, whether like last year where it was D tackles and edges, or how we're going to do it this year. So you can catch me there. And as well, I just launched a Patreon where I've been going live over on Kick just because they're a little bit better with their allowing us to broadcast some film stuff. And I've been doing live with film watch-alongs, and you can catch, if you missed the lives, the replays on my Patreon over there, as well as get access to my big board and all my different draft profiles as I go along in the process of this season scouting.
Bill.
Yeah, so you can find me over on X at Spark Scouting. Also a writer and analyst for the Right Way Sports Network. That's TWSN.net, where I cover NFL, NFL draft, and college football for all 32 teams in the NFL. Start with Browns coverage and work back from there. In college football, I cover all the teams, especially Indiana and Notre Dame. You can also catch me here on the Mrs. R Relevant Daily Draft podcast on Wednesdays. Sometimes I may show up on a Friday. I may show up on a Monday. You never know. But yeah, you can check me out on X at Spark Scouting, also on TikTok, Instagram, Threads, and Substack. If you search Spark Scouting, you'll see my lovely mug pop up. Come talk some ball. Let's talk about it. Like I said, I am the reigning comp king. If you've got a player, I've probably got a comp for him.
Durst.
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at Durst NFL Draft. Of course, I'm also here on at least Wednesdays on the Mrs. R Relevant podcast and playing around with the Draft Professor mock draft database. I do have a question for Corey, before he ends up shooting out of here. So I'm curious about their plan for Trey Moore. So I'll add a little context. Transfer UTSA. He was a 2022 true freshman All-American. Set the UTSA single sacks record for 14 in 2023 and tackles for loss 18 in 2022. He was the 2023 American Athletic Conference Defensive Player of the Year, and then he transferred to Texas last year. I saved him last summer, and I thought he was going to be the best of the 3 defensive ends that Texas had, which ended up being 4 defensive ends because of the freshman All-American Colin Simmons, right?
Yeah.
So they moved him from edge to off-the-ball linebacker, and in doing that in your 5th season does not come without some risks. To me, I think what they saw was like a Jaylon Walker that they saw twice last year, who was this hybrid defensive end, pass rushing outside or off the ball linebacker, and maybe they saw that kind of niche for Trey Moore. But what do you think that they have planned for him?
Yeah, I think Texas is always they're careful about why they make these decisions. Same thing happened with the guy that transferred in, Brad Spence from Arkansas. They moved him from that linebacker room to now the edge room. And so they're seeing where these scouts are seeing them at. And I think a lot of NFL scouts see Trey Moore as a linebacker. They don't really see him as an edge player because of his size. And so Texas has been big on trying to get them ready for that next level. That's why recruits commit here, because they know it's the end goal isn't to be a national championship at Texas, is to be in the NFL. And so with Trey, it'll be interesting to see what he does in pass coverage, but we got a glimpse of that. If you look at the last 6 games of the year last year, that's when Trey really started to find his own at that kind of off-ball linebacker position, which I think gave them confidence to make it a full-time switch. If you look at his production in the first part of the season, it just wasn't great. He really wasn't doing much. And we were all looking around like, isn't this like the sack leader that we, transferred in? And so as time went on, though, he started to find his own, similar to what like Matthew Golden did. Matthew Golden wasn't doing nothing the first 6 or 5 games of the season until the second half. And so it just takes time. I feel like when it comes to coming from a like small program like UTSA to UT, it's a big switch. And so I think this year, you're right. I think you hit it right on the nose. They we talked to him about it. We talked to PK about it, and he's like, he's still going to rush like that. We're not just going to not let him rush. That's crazy. And so I'm interested to see how often does he rush, and is it like a Jalen Walker type situation where you kind of rush 25, 30, 40% of the time, or is he going to be rushing 65 and dropping back 35? So I'm interested, but I think it's a plan that they both agreed on. And when you have so much talent at the edge position already in Colin and Ethan Burke, you kind of want to bring that talent. You want the best 11 on the field. So how do you put Trey on the field? You got to move in the linebacker.
Yeah, and we've gone the entire Texas-Ohio State podcast without talking about Anthony Hill.
Yeah, facts.
Style. So I dropped their name. But, Bill, what did you have next?
Yeah, so to kind of take us home, because I know Corey's got an out on us. This game is going to be a high-profile game, not only from a college football standpoint, but from the NFL draft community standpoint. We're going to see 31 scouts from 20 NFL teams and 2 NFL GMs will be in attendance for this game in the shoe. It is going to be huge because you also think about it, these two teams head-to-head against each other are 2-2. So this is the rubber match meets the road. For me, and normally I'm not a big prediction guy, but I'm going to make one. I'm taking Texas, and that's a cold take, whatever you may have it. I'm taking Texas for the simple fact that I trust their running back duo in Wisner and Baxter more. I'm taking Texas because I trust the wide receiver crew of Ryan Wingo and Mosley, if he's healthy, who are future draft prospects, but then also DeAndre Moore, who's a 2026 guy. And then that defensive backfield, like we talked about in Michael Taaffe and Malik Muhammad. And then ultimately, when it comes down to it, if I'm looking at Arch Manning, who has a little bit of experience, even though it's against UL Monroe versus Julian Sayin, who's starting as a redshirt freshman, I'm taking Arch. For me, I'm taking Texas 26-23, and I'm running with it. I'm sure it'll end up on freezing cold takes come Monday morning, and I'm sure I'll be wrong. I've been wrong before. There's never a time I'm not wrong.
Was that a question or a statement? That was
little bit of
difficult
both.
for me to figure.
A little bit of both.
Hey, I like it though. You talking about that's a freezing cold take. I'll probably go get clipped for this. I've been saying this whole time that last month and a half, 2 months, check my TikTok, check my Twitter. I think that Florida game could be bigger test than this Ohio State game for Texas. I genuinely think that if DJ Lagway is 100% healthy, that game in the swamp will be more of a challenge. I just think that Texas loves these moments. They love these environments. Just check the past 2 years. Went into Tuscaloosa, handle business. Went into the big house, handle business. And the revenge factor as well is playing in as for this game. And Texas on true road games, they're 11-1 for the past 3 years. So there's something about being on the road that this team just loves. They love to get the horns down. They love the hate that they get on the road. And I think that's not a crazy take. I think you're spot on. I think they're going to win by 2 possessions, to be honest. So that's just me. That's not like me drinking burnt orange. That's just me just looking at the game and thinking that what this Julian Sayin dude is going to do in this first start against the #1 defense. I just don't have a lot of confidence in how they're going to score.
I guess I'll be the contrarian then, because I was going to say if I was going to throw a prediction, I'd probably take the upset with Ohio State this year. If in the long run, if these teams met up again later on this season, I think I'd be taking Texas and to be like one of those games where they lose early on and they beat them by multiple scores later on. But for me, it's going to be, yes, it's an away game, and Texas performs well in away games. We still have to kind of factor that in a little bit. But for me, and we kind of hit on it with our first question in the entire podcast, was Arch Manning, is he going to be able to get schemed up, or is he processed enough when it comes to mentally handling the game to go against an Ohio State defense that's returning in a significant level of secondary starters, including Caleb Downs, who's probably going to be the best graded player in this entire game on any side of the football? Is that defense going to be able to, even if he has taken steps, minimize what Arch can do? And then you have matchups with the linebackers of Ohio State versus the running backs of Texas, where you can go see that going either way with them. And with Ohio State having some replacements on defensive line, Texas had some replacements on offensive line with Kelvin Banks leaving. You can definitely see how there are matchups where it's going to come down to who can win those key moments. And I think the biggest key matchup is going to be if Arch Manning can overcome that Ohio State secondary and Ohio State defensive game planning with how much consistency they have, especially in that back end with the high-end talent. And if that's going to be, I think, what decides whether or not Texas can come out of this game. So I'm going to lean on the Ohio State having the consistency with that back end be taking this game. But if these teams met again in the playoffs, like the Sugar Bowl, wherever they would end up meeting, I would probably take Texas by, again, like 2 scores, kind of like what Corey was saying.
Durst, do you want to weigh in?
Well, I actually did place a wager on Texas. Now, this was to cover, not to necessarily win, but they got 2 ways for me to win, is for them to win the game or to cover. So Ohio State has the home field advantage, but I think Texas has the coaching advantage. And I think those two sort of cancel out a little bit. And so I think they're pretty evenly matched teams. Of course, with recency bias, Ohio State won barely, and so I think just the kind of the law of average and reverting to the mean, I think Texas has a very good chance of winning this game. So.
Okay.
What would that take? I mean, it's going to take a lot of pressure, on Julian Sayin so that he can't, get the ball to Jeremiah Smith. It's going to take them, I don't have a lot of confidence in either of these offensive lines right now. Again, there's individual prospects I like, but when you take the collective of the 5-man offensive line per team, I'm not so sure I have a lot of confidence in them. Kenyatta Walker for Texas, for Ohio State, I like as a defensive end who does a lot of stunts and spins and such. And then of course Texas has got a plethora of people from Ethan Burke and Colin Simmons. So I think Texas has got a really good chance in this game.
Okay, my game prediction is Ohio State gets 2 first-round picks out of this game. Texas this year 0. So that's
wow.
I'm taking a cop out. Yeah, I'm taking the cop out. But
one last thing before we go.
Oh, go for it.
There's two names that's probably not on draft boards right now that I don't think they're even eligible to come in the draft until next year. But we didn't talk about them. Wide receiver Parker Livingstone. You talk about Emmett Mosley being hurt. Parker has been the guy that stepped up throughout camp, in spring, even in the fall. He's Arch's roommate. They have a connection. You know when it happens with roommates, like they're tight. Mm-hmm. And so something about Parker Livingstone, Arch likes a lot with him. And another guy on the back end on defense to go with Taaffe is Jaylon McDonald. That's another kid that everyone has been raving around, even Makupa, Jade Barron. They're saying McDonald is the next dude in that back end that's going to go pretty high in the draft. And so those are 2 names to look out for Longhorn fans.
Yep. And to add to, Jelani McDonald is eligible for 2026 class. Parker Livingstone is your 2027 guy.
Well, for the 90 podcasters at the Draft Professor, for Durst, Bill, Owen, special guest Corey, this has been incredible. If you are watching the podcast right now, please go and hit subscribe on YouTube, please and thank you. But we are going to close this down. Thank you so much, and we'll see you on a podcast again tomorrow night, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.